Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Ned Bellavance, Ned1313 on Twitter, and welcome to the Daily Check-In for August 19th, 2020. Glad to have you here. It's going to be an exciting time. I'm going to be talking about something that is contentious, to say the least, in the world of tech analysis, and that's why multi-cloud makes sense. And I know there's been a lot of pushback in the Twittersphere or the blogosphere or whatever you want to call it, the Twitterverse, about why multi-cloud is a terrible idea, which no one should ever do, and damn your eyes for even saying so. Or in more nuanced terms, some people have, kind of said, maybe it's not a great idea. Maybe as a sane default, as a sensible best practice, multi-cloud should not be the option. And because I've worked in consulting and because I have a perspective on this from the business side of things, I think it's not wrong, but no one's going to follow it, just like most best practices. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Before I get into that, the only housekeeping item I have is that, did you know that I have a podcast called Day 2 Cloud on the Packet Pushers network of podcasts? You can find it at day, D-A-Y, 2, T-W-O, cloud, you know how to spell cloud.io. And it's a weekly conversation about things that are in the cloud universe. So if that sounds interesting to you, please, I highly encourage you to check it out. We got a lot of really good guests on there, especially lately. There's just been some fantastic conversations on things like multi-cloud and cloud repatriation. So check it out. That's really all I have in terms of that. I was trying to see what the most recent episode is for Day 2 Cloud, but my phone's taking forever, so we'll get back to that. Before I talk about today's topic, let's check in. How are you? What's going on? Are you having like a decent week? I mean, we're halfway through the week. Maybe you had tacos yesterday. I don't know. I told you about my taco face mask. It's amazing. I love it. I wore a different face mask today. It had pizza slices on it, and my daughters thought it was hilarious. They loved the pizza face mask. That was pretty awesome. I also did something that I haven't done in 2 years, play golf. Apparently you just go and hit the ball and then you chase after it. And then once you find it, you hit it again. And then once you find it the last time, you hit it into a hole and then you pick it. It's really weird. The whole thing is weird. I guess that's what I'm saying. But I did it because, I'm trying to make my father happy, basically. He was looking forward to playing some golf with his son, and so that's what we did. I finally found the episode that's publishing today on Day 2 Cloud. It's What Do Words Mean? And it's an amazing conversation that I had with Karen Lopez, aka Data Chick, on Twitter, and we were talking about how infrastructure people and data management people talk about the same terms in completely different ways, and how we're like almost boats in the night, missing each other because we're talking past each other when we're using the same terminology. So that was a really interesting conversation. I highly recommend checking that out. Let's talk about the main topic, though, which is why multi-cloud makes sense. Now, first, we got to define multi-cloud, because of course we do, right? And I'm not doing this to build up a straw man for me to then tear down. I think if we want to talk usefully about multi-cloud, we can't use one of the definitions that I've heard, which is multi-cloud is when a company is using multiple different clouds within the organization, because almost every company is doing that. And if you define a cloud loosely enough, everybody's doing that. So if you use Office 365, if you use Salesforce.com and you use AWS, you are technically multi-cloud by that definition. And I don't think that's a useful definition. That's like saying you're multi-vendor. Well, of course you are. You're not using one vendor for your entire technology stack, and you're not using one cloud provider for your entire technology stack. So that's a pointless differentiation. The other way to define multi-cloud, and the thing that I hear a lot, is using multiple cloud providers for a single application. So if I have an application, say it's my finance application, and I am hosting it in AWS, but I'm also hosting a copy of it in Azure, then that would be considered multi-cloud. And if I wanted to, run down the pike with that specific example, that probably doesn't make any sense. Why would I run my finance app in AWS and Microsoft Azure, the exact same bits running, say, as virtual machines in both cloud providers? That's not especially useful. But not every application is structured in that way. And there are absolutely cases where using what exists in different clouds for different components of your application could potentially make sense. And I'll come to an actual example in a moment, but I want to talk about what some of the common objections are to using multi-cloud. One common objection is that you have increased your complexity when you decide to go multi-cloud. And in a sense, that makes sense, right? I'm using AWS and GCP, and those are two different providers. So by choosing to use two instead of one, now I've increased my complexity. But the thing you have to consider is, have you ever tried using lots of the services in a single public cloud provider? Using more than one service in a public cloud provider increases your complexity, because of course it does. And once you get past the shiny veneer and the portal, you'll find that most of these services have completely different interfaces, have completely different ways of interacting with them. Heck, AWS doesn't even strive for consistency in the portal. If you go to EC2 and then you go to S3, you might not even realize it's the same company, and it's definitely not the same portal. So the overarching thing is, yes, you have something like IAM for AWS, but every public cloud has some sort of identity service, and you could probably tie it back to a third party. And if you think about your existing data center, chances are you're not using Active Directory for everything, because your Linux folks want to use LDAP and Oracle's using whatever it's using, and inside SQL, you're using SQL-based authentication. It's already a complex mess. It's not like you don't have this already. So the idea of saying, oh, well, if you use more than one cloud, you're making it more complex. It's like, if you're using the cloud, you're making it more complex. So I don't think that's a particularly valid argument. There is an argument that there's a lack of cohesion there. I've got my VPCs in AWS, and I've created all my resources that use those VPCs, and I understand it well. Okay, there's a cohesion argument that you can make, but I don't think complexity is the right argument. Another common argument against it is that you'll end up increasing your spend, because now your spend is spread across all these different cloud providers. Well, if we go back to every company is probably using multiple clouds anyway, you already have this problem. The problem is just a little bit different. And in order to get your arms around that problem, there's a pretty good chance that you have already paid for some third-party piece of software to track your spending across multiple different SaaS subscriptions and your public cloud stuff. So adding another public cloud just means adding it to your third-party tracking tool. So, okay. Another one is that you're going to have to learn how to use more than one cloud. And sorry, you're going to have to do that anyway. And it might not be you specifically. I don't mean you as a person are going to have to learn how to use every single different cloud, because that's ridiculous. If you look at your existing team, your existing IT and development team, you have some developers that use JavaScript, and then you have others that are C# and ASP.NET. You have some infrastructure folks that focus on Windows and others that focus on Linux. You have some that are networking specialists and some that are security specialists. You already have differentiation. You're going to end up with specialists for AWS, and you're going to end up with specialists in Azure. And honestly, even those specialists are going to have to become further specialized because, as we discussed before, of the breadth and differentiation of services that exist in all these different public clouds. So you're going to have to learn it anyway, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So adding another cloud, yes, that's a thing. And if you're a really small organization, you might not have the staffing to do that. But for larger organizations, they already kind of do this anyway. The next common argument is lowest common denominator. The idea is that if I have my application deployed across multiple clouds for redundancy or whatever, I can only use the lowest common denominator of services across those clouds and the features inside those services to reduce complexity, and because it's not going to be consistent otherwise. And that is absolutely true. That is true. No one's saying it's not. But the thing is, if you're developing an application to take advantage of the best that each cloud provider has to offer, then there's a pretty good chance that you're actually going to end up not using the best service if you limit yourself to one public cloud versus another. It's kind of like saying we're a Cisco shop, so we won't buy any non-Cisco equipment, even if some vendor out there makes a better firewall or makes a better, I don't know, server hardware or makes better anything, we're a Cisco shop, we'll buy all Cisco because that'll make things consistent, right? Well, if you've been through that nightmare, you know that's not entirely true. And so you end up using multiple vendors. That's kind of what you do. The last objection is that no one's really doing this out there. No one's using multi-cloud. And I hate to say, well, actually, businesses are absolutely doing this. They are creating applications that use multiple clouds as part of that application to create a service that's consumable by others. And one example of that, and one that I've actually seen, is I worked with a company that used Azure for their remote desktop services, but they didn't like Azure Traffic Manager. They just didn't think it did a great job. And they were really bought into Amazon's Route 53 and using that. So their sort of GSLB and their failover of traffic was all handled by AWS, but then the application components, some of them were running in Microsoft Azure, and technically that fulfills this sort of multi-cloud thing, and they were using what they considered best of breed from the cloud providers for different services that they needed. So that's a very simple example, and I'm sure I could come up with other examples, and I at some point I probably will. But I just want to end this with the fact that when you make a blanket statement like multi-cloud is a bad idea, you have to be very careful about the assumptions you make and the way that you think about public cloud. Because if we're really thinking about public cloud as a set of services and we want to design an application that takes advantage of what the best public clouds have to offer, then we're going to end up with a multi-cloud application anyway. So that's my thought on why multi-cloud makes sense in our current environment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm sure there's going to be some pushback about this. So hit me up. Let me know. I'm on Twitter. It's Ned1313. Leave some comments in the video or find me on LinkedIn. That's all I have